Imagine this under the blazing Egyptian sun. A solemn procession slowly makes its way toward the Valley of the Kings. At the front walks the young pharaoh Tutankhamun, his face covered in gold, his eyes empty and within him. A mystery that would send chills down the world's spine 3,000 years later. But do not let the gold deceive you. Behind that dazzling mask lies a case that was never closed. The death of a powerful teenager turned into the greatest media spectacle in the history of archaeology. And do you know what is the strangest thing of all? Every person who touches this story, whether a scientist, a journalist, or a viewer watching a video, becomes entangled in the curse of curiosity. Before we lift the lid of the coffin, do one thing: hit subscribe so that when history rises again, you will not just stand aside and watch, you will become a witness. Now, get ready, because the story that follows is not merely about a mummy, but about how humankind killed the divine and called it progress. Unsealing the tomb, the sigh of history. Imagine this: the year is 1922. The Egyptian desert stretches endlessly, its golden sands glowing like the sunburned skin of the earth itself. A man bends down holding an oil lamp in his trembling hand, sweat mixing with dust. He takes a deep breath, standing in awe before a slab of stone carved thousands of years ago. Howard Carter, the British archaeologist, is about to open a doorway leading to something no human has seen since the time when gods still had business on Earth. The stone door trembles slightly. The flickering light reflects off ancient hieroglyphs, and Carter, his voice hoarse and shaking, turns to his patron, Lord Carnarvon. "Can you see anything?" "Yes. I see wonderful things." American viewers would shiver at this moment, because they know in every movie, whenever someone says wonderful things inside an Egyptian tomb, there is usually a mummy waiting somewhere to make a cameo. But what Carter did not know was that when he opened that tomb, the world had just unsealed an ancient Pandora's box. 3,000 years of silence were shattered, and with the first ray of light shining upon the young king's golden coffin, a series of strange deaths began to spread like a plague on a deadline. The first to die was Lord Carnarvon himself, a mosquito bite, an infection. And at that very moment, the electric lights in Cairo flickered out, plunging the entire city into darkness. The British press called it "the Pharaoh's curse awakens." From that moment on, the world no longer asked who died, but who will die next. Yet to be fair to Tutankhamun, the young pharaoh never wrote, "Whoever touches my tomb is doomed." There is no such inscription on the walls. And still more than 20 people who had taken part in the excavation or the opening of the tomb died unexpectedly, many for reasons no one could quite explain. Cameras, newspapers, and the curiosity of humankind together, they built one of the greatest public relations storms in the history of archaeology. But to understand why the entire world trembled before a 19-year-old boy who had died over 3 millennia ago, we must ask another question, one that Howard Carter himself never dared to speak aloud. Why did this pharaoh die so young? Why would a king surrounded by power, divinity, and gold die before reaching the age of 20? Was it illness, an accident, or a silent act of murder hidden within the shadows of the Egyptian court? And if you believe in the supernatural, could the so-called curse be real? Or is it just the mummy's version of Wi-Fi weak signal, but strangely well connected? What do we actually know for certain? Tutankhamun's mummy was found perfectly preserved. A coffin of solid gold, a mask inlaid with precious stones, 5,000 burial objects, and a rather unfortunate set of teeth. Yet what haunts us most is his face, young, delicate, almost peaceful, with eyes closed, as if still hearing the thunder of those who betrayed him. When modern science scanned the mummy with CT technology, what they saw was not merely bones, but a chain of mysteries layered upon each other, like the resin of mummification. A broken leg, a head injury, traces of malaria in his blood, and the cruel truth of royal lineage. Tut was the child of a brother and sister, the kind of family tree that would make Freud run for the hills. And so people began connecting the dots. A boy born from tangled genes, frail in health, placed upon the throne before reaching puberty, surrounded by those older, wiser, and with very good reasons to want that throne vacant. This is no longer a fairy tale about a legendary pharaoh. It is an ancient political drama dripping with blood gold and the sweet scent of embalming resin. Pause for a moment. If you are an American watching this video, you might be wondering, why should I care about a teenager who died 300 years ago in Egypt? The answer is simple, because this is the original version of every modern conspiracy theory. Before there was Area 51, before there was JFK, before the Illuminati, there was Tutankhamun, the royal boy who died mysteriously, and everyone said there is no way that was an accident. And so the story begins, as all great mysteries do, a dead body, a rumor, and a world not yet ready for the truth. When the first flashlight beam touched that golden coffin, what awoke was not only the pharaoh, but humanity's most dangerous instinct, the craving to uncover what was meant to stay buried. In the next chapter, we will lift the veil of the royal palace in Thebes, where a boy once wore a crown heavier than his own body and began the journey from the throne to the coffin. Who loved him, who betrayed him, and who wrote the first chapter of the curse? That is the question you, the one watching this video, are about to answer for yourself. The fragile boy king. 9 years old on the throne, you may think that means power, but in truth it means being a puppet caught between two greater hands, one divine and one political. Tutankhamun was not born in the golden light of royal glory. He was born into a tangled web of genetics and palace drama. His father was Akhenaten, the infamous pharaoh who rebelled against the entire Egyptian religious system. He abandoned the worship of hundreds of old gods and raised up only one, Aten, the sun god. A decision powerful enough to enrage an empire, ignite rebellion among the priests, and give future historians something to gossip about for the next 3,000 years. And Tut's mother, no need to look far, she was Akhenaten's own sister. Yes, the royal family of ancient Egypt loved in the true Game of Thrones mummy edition style. They believed that keeping the bloodline pure would preserve divine power. In reality, it only preserved a long list of genetic defects. When modern scientists examined Tutankhamun's DNA, they found clear evidence of inbreeding leading to multiple deformities, a clubfoot, a curved spine, and a weakened immune system. In today's terms, Tut was the kind of child born with noble genes, but a broken system, royal on paper, fragile in real life. And so around the year 1332 before Christ, a boy of about 9, barely old enough to need help with his breakfast, suddenly had the crown of the sun god placed upon his head. From a hidden child within the palace walls, he became pharaoh of an entire empire. Sounds epic, does it not? But imagine this, you are 9 years old, it is your first day of school, and instead of a classroom, they take you straight to the White House, hand you a microphone and say, "Here, please run the world for us." Tutankhamun did not rule. He was ruled. Behind the throne, 2 men truly held the reins of power. I, former advisor to King Akhenaten, the sweet-talking uncle who secretly controlled every switch of authority. Horemheb, a cold-blooded general who looked at the throne as a chessboard missing only one move to declare checkmate. And what about Tut? He was the face of the brand. a necessary symbol to soothe the people after the chaos of religious reform. A boy with an innocent face wrapped in gold, crowned like a god, yet he decided nothing except perhaps which ceremonial robe to wear today. During the first years of his reign, and Horemheb rebuilt the old order, restored the worship of the god Amun, and used Tutankhamun's name as a legal seal to justify everything they did. They even made him change his name from Tutankhaten, meaning the living image of Aten, to Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun. A political rebranding cleaner than anything a modern PR agency could pull off. But behind that mask of power was a frail, lonely, and sickly boy. Archaeological evidence shows that Tut walked with wooden crutches. More than 100 of them were found in his tomb. His ankle was deformed. His thigh bone had once been broken. Some experts believe that a single fall could have been fatal. In a world where pharaohs were considered sons of gods, perhaps there was no tragedy more profound than a son of God who could not walk on his own. But do not think his story was only sorrow. Tutankhamun, though young, showed surprising intelligence and determination. Several decrees carved in archives reveal that he tried to restore temples neglected by his father. He sent troops to suppress uprisings and revived the grand festivals of Amun, signs of a child struggling to prove he was a true king. Yet around him, power was never silent. And Horemheb saw that clearly. A young king beginning to grow up meant danger, and danger in the politics of ancient Egypt was often handled in the most traditional way, buried along with gold and sweet-smelling resin. Then there was another figure in this picture, Ankhesenamun, Tutankhamun's wife and half-sister. She was a few years older than him, born of the same tangled bloodline, and perhaps the only person in the palace who truly seemed to love him. After Tut's death, a letter was found from the Egyptian queen to the Hittite king in the north, begging him to send a prince to marry her, because I do not wish to choose anyone from the land of Egypt. That line sounds like a lonely sigh across the desert, a plea from a woman who knew her husband had not died a natural death. Back to Tutankhamun, with a frail body and wounds that never healed, with violent fevers that modern medical studies have documented by detecting malaria parasites in his remains, with relentless political pressure and constant isolation. His death begins to look less like a mystery and more like a scheduled fate. Yet the greatest question remains, did he die of illness, or was illness merely a mask for a hand that touched the crown with a dagger hidden in the rites? Look closely at the boy's portrait on the golden mask. That smile, thin, slight, almost reluctant, is not the smile of a triumphant king. It is the look of someone who knows his fate yet chooses to keep walking. If the pharaoh's curse is real, perhaps it is not carved in stone stelae, but woven into their stories themselves. Whoever dares to steal a child's innocence must face the consequences of ambition, whether in this world or beyond the far bank of the Nile. Tutankhamun was not the victim of magic, but of a power system that devoured its own. He did not die because of an ancient curse, but because of a more modern, one-human greed. And when we retrace the path of that young king, all the questions from part 1 ring louder. Perhaps the curse does not kill at all. Perhaps it is simply how history reminds us that an empire built on deception will always collapse beneath the weight of its own crown. We are about to enter the most unsettling part of the story, where the mummy ceases to be a spiritual symbol and becomes ancient forensic evidence, hidden wounds, impact, fractures, calamity. And this time, Tutankhamun is not only the victim, but the sole surviving witness to a case that is 3,300 years old. The hidden wounds. Impact, fracture, accident. A chariot racing as fast as an ancient Ferrari, if you fall, you fly without brakes. And if you are Pharaoh Tutankhamun, that fall might just be your one-way ticket to eternity. Tutankhamun, the teenage king with a frail body and a limp, died at the age of 19. No war, no public assassination, just disappearance. When Howard Carter opened his mummy, it did not lie in the serene stillness typical of royal burials. It was chaos, cracks, resin leaks, and broken bones. And so thousands of years later, humanity began to open what would become the longest forensic case file in history. Scene 1. In 1968, more than 4 decades after the discovery, scientists performed an X-ray examination of Tutankhamun's body. On the screen appeared a small fragment of bone inside the skull. It looked like evidence of a violent blow. The world gasped. He was struck on the head. The pharaoh was murdered. The press pounced on the story like hyenas on a carcass. King Tut murdered blazed across newspaper headlines worldwide. Hollywood caught the scent of drama, and soon films about the murdered pharaoh were born. But as in every classic mystery, a small detail ruined the grand twist. When experts re-examined the mummy in 2005 using ultra-detailed 3D CT scans, they discovered that the bone fragment might have slipped into the skull during mummification. In plain terms, the killer was the funeral staff. Thus, the blunt force murder theory was dismissed. No skull fracture before death. No signs of violent trauma. The pharaoh had not been struck on the head, at least not by stone, though perhaps by fate itself. The next theory, a chariot accident, the Ferrari of the Bronze Age. When you are pharaoh, you do not walk, especially when you cannot, but you still want to look as daring as the warrior kings before you. And in the ancient world, nothing was cooler than driving a chariot, the original supercar. Egyptian chariots were mechanical marvels of their time, light, swift, built on 2 wheels racing across sand at speeds of over 25 miles per hour, which is about 40 kilometers per hour, the equivalent of driving a sports car without fastening your seatbelt. The accident theory arose from one striking discovery. Tutankhamun's left leg showed a severe fracture, an open wound, and the bone around it bore signs of infection, meaning he was injured while still alive, not after death. In addition, his rib cage and much of the front chest bones were missing, as if they had been crushed and later removed during embalming. Now imagine this, a crimson sunset over the desert, the sound of chariot wheels grinding against sand. The young king, frail but determined, insists on proving that he can ride like his warrior ancestors. The chariot speeds forward. A startled horse. A wheel catches in the sand. The pharaoh is thrown crashing violently to the ground, a fall that shatters his leg, crushes his chest, and spills his blood. Dramatic, tragic, logical, and admittedly very Netflix docu-series friendly. But then one simple question makes the whole theory tremble. If he was injured so badly, why was he not treated? Ancient Egypt had surprisingly advanced medicine. They could set bones, stitch wounds, and a pharaoh had his own team of royal physicians, or more accurately, a patch and update squad for the living dead. So if Tutankhamun had been wounded, why is there no trace of any medical intervention? Some scholars counter that the injuries may have occurred just before his death. Perhaps he fell from the chariot, went into shock, developed an infection, and was struck down by malaria, a fatal combination that left no time for treatment. Modern DNA analysis from 2010 confirmed the presence of Plasmodium falciparum parasites, the agents of malignant malaria, within Tutankhamun's body. Combined with an open wound and his weakened health, that was a deadly mix. And so the image of the young pharaoh thrown from his chariot lying in the red sands with sweat and blood mingling together became the symbol of a god who fell not because of war, but because of the recklessness of youth. However, not everyone agrees with the sports accident theory. Some argue that the leg injury does not match the angle of a chariot crash. The bone structure suggests the trauma may have occurred in a constrained position, as if he were pushed or pulled. If so, the accident was not really an accident. It was an arranged accident. Who would do such a thing? Remember the two names from before I and Horemheb. When a boy begins to grow into a man old enough to rule a chariot, mishap becomes the most convenient way to reset power without leaving evidence. Yet the truth is more complex than any political plotline. When experts performed a full-body CT scan of Tutankhamun's mummy, they discovered something strange. The entire left side of his chest was missing, not because of time or decay, but apparently removed during the embalming process itself. Some believed that Tutankhamun's body was damaged not by violence but by mistakes made during mummification. After the embalmers poured too much hot resin over his corpse, the substance partially ignited, lightly burning the skin. Tutankhamun's mummy was literally charred, a cruel error that 20th century archaeologists would later call a chemical accident. That was also why his body became fused to the golden coffin so tightly that Howard Carter had to cut it apart, piece by piece, to remove it. Head, legs, torso separated and wrapped individually. A resurrection ritual in the most literal sense, but tragically, his body had to die a second time. So in the end, what was the cause? An accident, a sophisticated murder, or a combination of fate, genetics, and one foolish moment on a chariot? Most scientists lean toward what they call the fatal combo: a fall that broke his leg, infection, malaria, death. No daggers, no conspiracies. Just one fall and a body too weak to survive the night. Yet to the ancient Egyptians, every death carried meaning. To them, the young king did not fall from his chariot. He was taken by the gods, riding a blazing celestial chariot, into the afterlife. And for those who disturbed his tomb, every wound, every fractured bone became evidence of a curse. He who harms the body of the pharaoh shall share his fate. Curiously, or perhaps fatefully, the first people who touched his body, from Carter to Lord Carnarvon, all met misfortune. A coincidence so uncanny, it feels cursed. Tutankhamun did not die a glorious death. He died as a young man trying to prove something and failing at the height of his brilliance. Yet it is that very fragility that made his story immortal. Because among all the pharaohs who were worshipped as gods, only Tutankhamun was truly human. He fell broke and was shattered, and 3,000 years later, the world still speaks his name to remember that even gods can die from a single fall. Disease and a hostile environment, a deadly cocktail of sand and infection. When the body of a young king, already frail by birth, faced an invisible enemy more terrifying than any courtly conspiracy disease. Disease, the one thing pharaohs always believed could strike mortals but never gods. Yet, in a cruel twist of irony, a ruler preserved in gold and fragrant resin was ultimately killed by something so small it could only be seen under a microscope. When death wore the shape of a mosquito. More than 3,000 years later, when science entered Tutankhamun's tomb, it brought no spells, no sacred chants, only DNA test tubes and CT scanners. And what they found silenced the world. In the mummy's tissue, scientists detected the DNA of Plasmodium falciparum, the parasite responsible for malignant malaria. A pharaoh killed by a mosquito bite. If not for the word gold in his biography, this might have been the most ordinary royal death in Egyptian history. But do not laugh too soon, because in those days, Egypt was a breeding ground for plague. The Nile gave life, water, fertile soil, and billions of mosquitoes. The swamps surrounding palaces, tombs, and temples were luxury resorts for disease-bearing insects. And let us not forget, Tutankhamun's mummy was found with an open wound on his leg, a fracture that had not fully healed. An open wound plus a humid desert climate plus malaria parasites a fatal combination even the god Amun could not overcome. A body full of royal bugs. When scientists analyzed Tutankhamun's DNA, they discovered several severe genetic mutations. Deformities in the bones of his feet, a clubfoot that forced him to use crutches, a curved spine and an elongated skull, the result of inbreeding between his father and his aunt. Abnormalities in genes related to immunity and blood circulation. This young pharaoh, in essence, was a royal software full of bugs. All it took was one system error, a fall, or a mosquito bite for the entire program to crash. The irony is that the very thing meant to make him divine by blood instead turned Tutankhamun into the most fragile god in Egyptian history. And then there was that left leg, the fatal wound. When experts performed CT scans, they found that embalming resin had seeped deep into the fractured bone, which meant the wound was still open at the time of death. That revealed two things. 1. Tutankhamun died very soon after the injury. There was no time to recover. 2. His death was most likely the result of an infection that spread throughout his body. Imagine the scene: a fevered night in the palace of Thebes. A 19-year-old king lying motionless in bed, cold sweat on his skin, trembling, while priests muttered prayers around him, and courtiers waited unsure whether they were waiting for a miracle or for an opportunity. No one knows exactly how long it took, but every piece of evidence says this: his death was quiet, agonizing, and beyond saving. Disease does not kill a king, it kills a kingdom. For a nation like Egypt, the death of a pharaoh was more than the loss of one man. It was the breaking of the bond between gods and mortals. Because a pharaoh was not merely a ruler, he was the guarantor that the sun would rise each morning. When Tutankhamun died, the people believed that the gods had turned away. His funeral was held in haste. Archaeological traces show that his coffin was repurposed, and his tomb was smaller than royal standards. Some of the artifacts within even bore other names, meaning they had been reused. Yes, the golden king of the modern world was once buried with second-hand goods. That was how ancient Egypt seemed to say, "The boy left too soon for us to prepare properly." But was it only disease? Here lies the question that scholars have debated for a century. If Tutankhamun truly died of malaria and infection, why did those around him act with such suspicious speed? The powerful uncle advisor, ascended the throne just days after Tut's death. Horemheb, the ambitious general, was proclaimed the heir, and Ankhesenamun, the young widow, vanished from the historical record, leaving behind only one desperate letter to the Hittite king. "My husband is dead, and I do not wish to choose anyone from the land of Egypt." A letter that sounds both fearful and despairing and whispers the chilling truth. Disease was not the only thing that killed him. The mummy speaks. Tutankhamun's body is not merely a corpse. It is a diary written in flesh and bone. Every crack, every patch of charred skin, every layer of resin is a line of data. Experts call him the most overanalyzed corpse in history, the most scanned, examined, and dissected body on the planet. They found that the embalming resin had been poured at high temperatures, burning the skin. His head was separated from his torso because the resin had fused him to the coffin. His fingers and toes were broken when Carter's team tried to remove the body. If there truly is a pharaoh's curse, perhaps it began the moment people violated his body in search of gold. The world, intoxicated by that golden shine, forgot that inside lay a 19-year-old boy, killed by a mosquito in pain and forgotten. When science touches a legend. By 2010, a team of Egyptian and German scientists released a comprehensive DNA analysis. Tutankhamun had died from a combination of genetic frailty, a leg injury, and severe malaria. No sign of poison, no blow to the head, no dagger. And yet, paradoxically, the more data we have, the deeper the mystery grows. Because every scientific answer raises another question. If it was only disease, why did history rush to cover it up? If it was not conspiracy, why the calculated silence surrounding the death of a young king? One body, two deaths. Tutankhamun died once in his palace of sickness, weakness, and fate. But he died a second time when the modern world dissected him to satisfy its curiosity. Broken bones, scorched flesh, a body scanned and photographed exposed under the cold eye of the camera that is the real curse. A curse that kills not by magic, but by obsession, the human hunger to possess every mystery. For whether Pharaoh or scientist, humanity has never escaped that desire. And if you have ever wondered why the world remains obsessed with Tutankhamun, the answer lies in that very paradox. He was not an all-powerful pharaoh, but a fragile one. A king born to fail, and it is precisely that failure that made him immortal. The power conspiracy, blood in the shadows of the palace, who stands behind the curtain, a friend and advisor, or the one waiting to wear the crown upon your corpse. If the first three parts were tragedies of the body of genetic flaws, injuries, and disease, then this one is the tragedy of the soul. Because in ancient Egypt, the death of a pharaoh was never just a medical event. It was a transfer of power disguised as a sacred funeral. And in the story of Tutankhamun, behind the silk curtains, where torchlight could not reach, blood was spilled long before the embalming resin had dried. The palace of those who never sleep, the palace of Thebes, at the end of Tutankhamun's reign, was not merely a royal residence. It was an arena of power where every echoing footstep could be the sound of conspiracy. At the center stood the teenage pharaoh, frail, isolated, and around him circled three names that make history shiver: I, Horemheb, and Ankhesenamun. I, the elder advisor who had once served Tut's father, Akhenaten. A quiet, patient politician who knew every secret corridor of the palace like the lines on his palm. Horemheb, the general of the Egyptian army, commander of all its forces, a man who understood that if the pharaoh should fall, his sword would become a scepter. And Ankhesenamun, the wife, the sister, the only person who may have truly loved Tut, the single piece on the board that could either save or destroy the entire game. Three figures, three directions of power. And at the center, Tutankhamun, a golden pawn in a divine chess match. When the boy began to become a man. In the final years of his reign, Tutankhamun began to show a will of his own. He was no longer the smiling statue that A's faction had placed on the throne to legitimize their rule. He wanted to write his own decrees, issue his own orders, and command his own army. The problem: the Egyptian court did not need a pharaoh with opinions. It needed a compliant symbol, a divine figure who stood still while others pulled the strings. Records suggest that Tutankhamun tried to restore temples, sent troops to Nubia, and even began the construction of his own tomb acts of a man who knew he was being betrayed. And in that palace, every decision he made was a political stab in the dark. The motives of those left standing. I, once the right hand of Akhenaten, saw the grandson of his former master sitting on the throne, weak yet defiant, refusing to obey. He understood one thing clearly: if Tut died, the throne would be vacant, and the man who presided over the pharaoh's funeral could become the next pharaoh. In Egyptian tradition, the person who leads the pharaoh's funeral becomes the rightful successor to the throne. When Tutankhamun died, who conducted the funeral? I. And who wore the crown only a few days later? I. No elections, no councils, only this: the old king dies and the new king finishes the prayer. The transfer of power happened so quickly that people began to suspect I did not wait for death to come, he planned it. Then there was Horemheb, the general of the empire, once appointed by Tutankhamun as deputy of the king, a man whose power nearly equaled that of the gods. But when Tut died, The throne did not pass to him. I sat upon it first, and Horemheb waited. He waited until A himself died, then erased both I and Tut from history. In the records that followed, their names vanished from the monuments, as if neither had ever existed. It was a kind of assassination after death, the erasure of a soul from human memory. The disappearance of Queen Ankhesenamun, but perhaps the most tragic figure in this entire drama was Ankhesenamun. After her husband's death, the young woman not yet 20 found herself trapped. No heir, no power. And before her stood an old man old enough to be her father, demanding marriage to legitimize his throne. History preserves one haunting letter sent to the Hittite king in Anatolia, in which Ankhesenamun pleaded, "My husband is dead, and I have no son. They are forcing me to marry a servant. Send me one of your princes so that he may become king of Egypt, and I shall marry no one else." It reads like a cry for help. And what happened next was even more chilling. The Hittite prince was sent, but he died on the way to Egypt. No one knows who killed him, but we can guess. Only one man had both the power and the motive to stop that marriage. Afterward, Ankhesenamun vanished completely from history. No tomb, no statue, no inscription, only silence, the perfect signature of a successful disappearance. The case without a criminal. And yet, though every clue points toward modern archaeology cannot prove that Tutankhamun was murdered. No sign of poison, no stab wound, no evidence of blunt trauma. Only a frail body, a broken leg, and malaria. To kill with a dagger leaves evidence. To kill with time leaves none. If A truly orchestrated it, he never needed to strike Tutankhamun. He simply had to stand by and do nothing. An empire advanced enough to heal him, but one that chose instead to prepare the funeral earlier than planned. That was the art of murder by silence. When power rewrites history. After A seized the throne, he ruled for only a few years. Then came Horemheb the general, who had served both Tutankhamun and and he took control. And what was the first thing he did? He erased every trace of both men from temples, monuments, and records. The name Tutankhamun vanished from the royal lists. His temples were destroyed, his statues defaced. To such an extent that had Howard Carter not unearthed his tomb in 1922, the world might never have known that this king had ever existed. The only thing that survived was a small tomb beneath the Valley of the Kings. A resting place believed to be temporary, but one that became the eternal legacy of modern Egypt. Who won the Game of Thrones? Died. Horemheb died. Their names were forgotten. And Tutankhamun, the frail boy who died too young, is remembered across the world 3,000 years later. If the gods were watching, they must be smiling. Because in the game of human power, it is often the one who appears to lose who wins in the end. Not by sword, not by throne, but by the weight of his story. The price of the throne. The death of Tutankhamun taught history a terrifying truth. In a world where power reaches the level of divinity, a human life is smaller than a grain of sand on the Nile. And when the throne shines too brightly, everyone around it becomes blind. Perhaps did not kill the king. Perhaps Horemheb did not destroy the queen, but they all killed something far more sacred, the belief that humankind could rule without betrayal. When Carter opened the tomb in 1922, he did more than open the door to the past. He opened a case that has never been closed. A case in which every witness has turned to dust, and only the curse remains alive. If you have listened this far, it means you too have been enchanted by history's spell. And I would bet you are asking yourself the same question: who truly killed the Pharaoh? Before we brush away another layer of sand from this ancient curse, take a moment. Hit subscribe now so that when the next chapter is revealed, you will be the first to hear the whisper of the past. And if this story has made your skin crawl, stirred your curiosity, or filled you with doubt, leave a comment below. Do you believe Tutankhamun died because of a conspiracy? Or because of destiny? I read every comment, every line, because every opinion is a missing fragment of history. Now take a deep breath. The next part will make you question even the truth you thought you knew. The Pharaoh's Curse, ancient myth or modern PR strategy. The door opens, the dead fall, but the question is, was it truly a divine curse? Or just the most successful headline of the 20th century? If the previous part told of a throne drenched in blood by those hungry for power, this one tells how the world's media picked up a torch, stepped into the tomb, and ignited a fear that would last for a century. This time it was not priests or sorcerers, but journalists, reporters, and eager readers in London who turned a 3,000-year-old mummy into the first influencer in history. When the news awakened the gods, in November of 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter bent down, lit his lamp, peered through a small opening in the stone door, and saw gold glimmering in the darkness. It was the moment humanity laid eyes on the nearly untouched tomb of a pharaoh. And like every great story before the gods could even express their anger, the newspapers had already gone to print. The Times of London held the exclusive rights to cover the discovery, and they needed something that would make readers drop their teacups, the Pharaoh's curse. Only a few months later, the world received the perfect headline gift. Lord Carnarvon Carter's financial backer was dead. The cause, a mosquito bite that became infected. An eerie coincidence, the bite was on the same spot as a wound on Tutankhamun's mummified cheek. And to add a pinch of cinematic drama, at the very moment he died, the electric lights across Cairo flickered out. And just like that, the curse went viral. Not through divine wrath, but through the power of the printed word. From fear to media frenzy. From England to America, from France to India, newspapers everywhere blared the headline, "Those who touch the Pharaoh's tomb shall die." Journalists became horror screenwriters. Every time someone connected to the excavation died, whether from illness, old age, or sheer coincidence, their name was added to the curse's victim list. A secretary with a heart attack, a doctor who died of infection, a museum worker who succumbed to lung disease. No one cared why they died, it only mattered that they did. Readers devoured every word as if reading a prehistoric Harry Potter. Egypt, tombs, mummies, golden light, and deadly spells, every element of a blockbuster was there. And so the Times sold record-breaking copies. Hollywood smelled the money. And Tutankhamun, the once-forgotten boy king, became the ultimate face of aesthetic fear. But was there ever really a curse? Years later, when Egyptologists returned to Tutankhamun's tomb, they examined every wall, read every hieroglyph, and they found nothing. No inscription saying, "He who opens this tomb shall die." No threat that the god Amun will claim the soul of the intruder. Nothing at all. What was written on the walls of Tutankhamun's tomb were words of blessing, prayers for the pharaoh's soul to live forever, verses wishing him unity with the sun god. If there was a curse, it was one of protection, not of vengeance. Simply put, the curse of the pharaoh was a collective creation of the Western press. A story born from colonial fear, curiosity, and a printing industry in desperate need of a headline. The truth through the lens of science. Nearly a century later, scientists tried to end the nightmare with data. They examined 44 people who had been directly involved in the excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb, comparing their average life expectancy with that of others from the same period. The result, the so-called cursed individuals, actually lived longer than the general population. Howard Carter lived to 64. Douglas Derry, the anatomist who examined the mummy, lived to 87. Some even wrote memoirs, signing copies with a touch of humor. We met no gods, only mold. Epidemiologists gave this phenomenon a name, the media curse. No one was killed by a god, but the entire world became haunted, and sometimes fear spreads faster than any disease. The scientific explanation still scary enough. If not the gods, then what killed people? The answer, microorganisms. Inside Tutankhamun's tomb, the air was stable, humid, and sealed the perfect environment for the fungus Aspergillus flavus, which produces aflatoxin, a deadly compound capable of causing anaphylactic shock or respiratory failure when inhaled. Researchers from the University of Graz in Austria found that this ancient mold had survived more than 3,000 years in the tomb's closed environment. When the door was opened, its spores filled the air, clinging to skin, hair, and clothing. Those with pre-existing conditions or weakened immunity, like Lord Carnarvon already suffering from an infection, became perfect prey. In other words, the curse was not magic at all. It was ancient microbiology working with the precision of modern PR, silent, efficient, and viral across the world. The radiation hypothesis. The Earth's own curse. Recent geological studies by Cairo University and the Egyptian Institute of Physics discovered that certain areas around the Valley of the Kings contain naturally high levels of uranium within the granite rock. Over thousands of years, this low-level radiation accumulated in the sealed environment of the tombs, potentially causing skin and lung damage to those exposed for long periods. It sounds like science fiction, but the idea of a radiation curse could explain why those who spent longer inside the tomb, such as Carnarvon and several staff members, fell ill, while those who only made brief visits, like Carter, lived long lives. The Pharaoh did not kill anyone. The earth simply protected its treasure. When myth meets marketing, Plato once said in the Republic, "He who tells the stories rules society." In the 20th century, storytellers were no longer poets. They were journalists, and the souls they ruled did not belong to pharaohs, but to millions of readers. Because a true curse does not need to be real. It only needs to be fascinating enough for people to believe, and once they do, it becomes more powerful than any evidence. The newspapers knew this. Hollywood knew this. And Egypt, thanks to the curse, gained the most successful tourism campaign in human history. Since 1922, millions of travelers have flocked to Cairo each year, lining up to gaze upon Tutankhamun's golden mask, whispering to themselves, "Will I be cursed?" Sorry, no, but your wallet will be. The essence of the curse. A mirror of humanity. In truth, the Pharaoh's curse is a perfect philosophical test. Plato once wrote of the shadows on the cave wall. Humans see the shadows and believe they are reality. We fear what we cannot see, believe what we cannot prove, and call it divine. Tutankhamun needed no magic. He only needed our curiosity, and the world did the rest. We are the ones who turned his death into a religion, his tomb into an exhibition, and our fear into a global brand. When belief becomes the curse. Today, every visitor to Cairo walks past the sign, King Tutankhamun, the eternal boy king. No one mentions Lord Carnarvon or Howard Carter. No one remembers those who exploited him for fame. But everyone believes what they wish to believe. And that is the real curse. Not one cast by the gods upon mankind, but one mankind has cast upon itself. Modern science, lifting the veil behind the Pharaoh's curse. The spells are silent, but DNA speaks. When a 3,000-year-old mummy enters a CT scanner, it tells the whole story, every fracture, every drop of blood, every lie history tried to bury. Because when humanity dares to shine X-rays through the body of a god, the mysteries begin to melt away like embalming resin under the desert sun. When science excavates history again, At the dawn of the 21st century, after decades of debate, Egypt decided to reopen the case of Tutankhamun, not with shovels and oil lamps, but with 3D CT scanners and the most advanced DNA analysis ever used on a mummy. In 2005, a specialized truck was brought to the Cairo Museum, carrying a mobile CT scanner inside. Tutankhamun, the boy who had once been worshipped as a god, was gently placed inside the machine, like a patient going in for a routine scan. Images began to appear on the screen: skull, leg bones, spine, hip joints, all clearer than any ancient inscription could ever tell. For the first time, the mummy underwent a medical examination after 3,000 years. The results that silenced the world. The CT report revealed no signs of skull trauma. The missing chest and ribs were due to the embalming process, not violence. A severe fracture in the left leg, an open wound that had not healed. In other words, Tutankhamun was not murdered by force. He was not poisoned. He was not struck on the head. His death came from the collapse of his own body. When experts analyzed the remaining soft tissue, they found DNA from the Plasmodium falciparum parasite, the cause of malignant malaria. He had suffered multiple malaria infections, and with an infected leg wound, his body could no longer fight back. In short, Tutankhamun did not die from conspiracy, but from the deadly combination of bad genes, mosquitoes, and infection. It is not a romantic verdict, but it is the most brutal truth science can deliver. DNA reveals the secrets of bloodlines and the royal tragedy. In 2010, the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, published the largest genetic study ever conducted on Egyptian royal mummies. The findings shocked the archaeological world. Tutankhamun was the son of Akhenaten and his own aunt. His family line showed multiple generations of inbreeding. His genes displayed markers for congenital bone disease, spinal deformity, and clubfoot. Yes, the royal bloodline of Egypt, once praised as the pure essence of the gods, turned out to be nothing more than a chain of genetic errors. If there was ever a true curse, it was written in the DNA of the royal family itself, a biological curse passed from generation to generation, until the fragile body of Tutankhamun became its final testimony. Reconstructing death in 3D, the mummy goes prime time. Using the CT scan, data researchers at the University of Liverpool in England reconstructed a complete 3D model of Tutankhamun, about 5 feet 6 inches tall, or roughly 1 meter 67 thin, with a club foot and muscle atrophy in one leg. When they simulated possible falls, they discovered that if he had fallen from a chariot or down a staircase, his left leg would have fractured in exactly the same way as the real injury. This confirmed it was an accident, not an assassination. From there, a series of 3D animations were created, showing the young king's body racked with fever infection, spreading to his heart, and within days his life fading away at just 19. The death of a pharaoh reconstructed by data, a form of digital resurrection, where the mummy becomes the lead actor in the documentary of his own demise. The radiation hypothesis, the Earth's own curse. Another finding stirred public fascination. Egyptian physicists discovered traces of natural radiation in the granite and sand of the Valley of the Kings. The levels were not high enough to kill instantly, but sufficient to harm those who spent many days working inside the tomb, especially if they inhaled dust or microscopic radioactive particles. In other words, the pharaoh's curse might actually be a natural radiation response. No sorcery, no dark magic, only uranium. And so the story shifted. Perhaps it was not the gods guarding their treasure, but the earth itself doing the job for them. Science versus the curse. Who really wins? Logic would say science wins. But never forget, emotion is king. Science can explain everything. Why Carnarvon died infection? Why the tomb glowed reflection from gold. Why the mummy turned black, overheated embalming resin. And yet, no matter how complete the explanations, the world still prefers to believe in the Pharaoh's curse. Because science gives us truth, but the curse gives us meaning. It gives us a story that makes your skin crawl, lets you imagine the god Osiris watching from above, and tempts you to tell your friends, "I am not superstitious, but this one is kind of strange." Human beings need mythology because the truth by itself is too quiet to swallow. When science and myth joined hands. In recent years, the Egyptian government has launched an exhibition titled Beyond King Tut, a fusion of 3D imagery, virtual reality, and real data from CT scans. Visitors put on their headsets, step through a virtual doorway, and come face to face with Tutankhamun bathed in a mystical blue light. This is no longer religion. It is a modern ritual of reverence where science and belief meet halfway. And in the 21st century, the Pharaoh's curse still exists, only now it is written in digital code. If mankind were to see the truth, would it believe it? After 3,000 years, the answer is still no. Even with DNA CT scans and endless data, millions continue to believe that Tutankhamun was cursed. Because faith is an old operating system and no scanner can ever delete it. Like Carter long ago, we keep knocking on the doors of tombs, hoping to find something that transcends the truth itself. The price of looking too deeply. Science can peel away every layer of history, but it forces us to face a terrifying question. Are we violating the past, just as Carter once did? To study Tutankhamun, we cut his body apart, separated his bones, and shone cold electric light upon a face once considered divine. Perhaps the true curse was never aimed at Carnarvon or Carter, but at us, the ones who cannot stop digging when standing before the unknown. In the end, truth does not kill it, silences. After centuries of debate, science has spoken. Tutankhamun died of illness, not magic. But every time the story is told, it changes color, because we cannot stop mythologizing the truth itself. The Pharaoh is silent now, yet humanity keeps speaking in his place. And through every video, every article, every curious gaze, Tutankhamun still lives. Not in gold, not in embalming resin, but within our imagination, where science and myth share the same table. Who has truly awakened? We have just completed an investigation that lasted 300 years. And in the end, perhaps what killed the Pharaoh was not a dagger, a disease, or a mosquito, but humanity itself with its obsession to know everything. Tutankhamun, the boy pharaoh, the child born from flawed genes who died upon a throne, became a symbol not only of Egypt, but of humankind's unending desire for immortality. The longest investigation in history. From the moment Howard Carter lit his torch inside the tomb in 1922, the world has never stopped investigating, and the more we search, the further the answers drift away. For a century, hundreds of scientists, historians, physicians, and even Hollywood directors have all contributed to the Tutankhamun trial. Some concluded accident. Others insisted political conspiracy. Some embellished divine curse. And most recently, genetic science declared just bad DNA and mosquitoes. They are all right and all incomplete. Because history, like the desert, buries itself again the deeper you dig. A death without a single killer. If we piece together every clue from CT scans to DNA, from politics to psychology, Tutankhamun's death is no simple case. It is a chain of falling dominoes. A child born from tangled bloodlines carrying diseases inherited from his own parents, to raised amid palace conspiracies where every word could mean execution. Injured, infected, surrounded by the fevered swarms of the Nile. And after death, turned once more into a victim dissected, mythologized, commercialized by the modern world. If you wish to name the killer of the pharaoh, the answer may be his own era, a world where power lineage and superstition fused into a single inescapable poison. The curse, a byproduct of imagination or evidence not yet understood. The modern world prefers a clean dismissal. There is no curse, only mold radiation and journalism. But sometimes absolute denial is just another form of avoidance. Who can say with certainty that in a tomb sealed for over 3 millennia, no form of energy or phenomenon existed, not magic, but something our science has not yet found the words to describe? The ancient Egyptians believed a soul could live forever through the repetition of its name. If that is true, then every time millions today speak the word Tutankhamun, are they not helping the pharaoh live again? Perhaps the curse never killed anyone. It simply ensured that no one would ever forget. From golden sands to social media, the pharaoh reborn in another form. When Howard Carter opened Tutankhamun's tomb, he had no idea he was creating one of the world's first global pop culture icons. A century later, that golden mask appears everywhere on logos, music albums, car commercials, horror films, and internet memes. Tutankhamun, once erased from history, is now an eternal symbol of life after death. No gods, no pyramids, just a story powerful enough to transcend time. Do you see the irony? The curse once made people afraid to touch the tomb, but today it makes them compete to touch history. The pharaoh won not through magic, but through the timeless magnetism of his own story. Science cannot kill a legend. Even though we can now reconstruct Tutankhamun's real face using artificial intelligence and read his genetic code in laboratories colder than any tomb, we still prefer to imagine that behind every data point there is a soul looking back at us. Science explains, but myth allows us to feel. And feeling, not knowledge, is what keeps a story alive for thousands of years. Every time we retell the tale of Tutankhamun, we are not just telling his story, we are telling the story of humanity's obsession with immortality. Another curse, subtler, deeper. When Carter lifted the lid of the coffin, he did not realize that the real curse was not buried in the sand, but hidden within humanity's desire to possess the past. We, the people of the 21st century, live in an age where every mystery is unearthed, every mummy scanned, every dream decoded by algorithms. But the more we know, the less we revere. The beauty of the past lies in its imperfection, its ambiguity, and when we strip it bare down to the bone, we unintentionally kill the soul of the story itself. Perhaps that is the true curse the pharaoh left behind. He who touches the sacred out of curiosity shall lose the ability to feel the sacred. An ending no one expected. It is ironic that in the eternal game between the living and the dead, it was Tutankhamun who truly won. The power-hungry vizier who killed the king was forgotten. Horemheb the general who erased the pharaoh's name was himself erased by time. And Tutankhamun, the frail boy who died too young, is now worshipped by the entire world. Those who believed they had conquered through power vanished into darkness. The one who lost, the one who never had a voice, endured through the memory of humankind. And perhaps that is the quietest revenge in all of history. Death, after all, is never the end. When we gaze into the golden eyes of Tutankhamun's mask, we are not merely looking into the past. We are looking into a mirror where our own curiosity, greed, faith, and fear reflect back at us. The pharaoh is dead, but the truth is not. And perhaps each time we retell his story, a part of Tutankhamun's soul steps once more through the doorway of time, smiling as if to say, "I do not need immortality." You have given it to me. The final curse of immortality. The modern world can decode everything, yet it cannot stop humanity from dreaming. And as long as Tutankhamun's story continues to be told, the curse is still alive. Not a curse from the gods, but the curse of human curiosity. The more we know, the more we crave to know. The more we explain, the more we feel something missing. Perhaps that is what separates us from the mummies. We are still alive, because we are still asking questions. And now, one final question for you. The one who has journeyed 300 years with us. If you stood before that tomb today, knowing everything you know, now would you dare to lift the lid again, or would you bow your head, realizing that sometimes mystery is what keeps history alive? And if you are still here, it means you have survived the Pharaoh's curse. Congratulations, you now belong to the fellowship of the curious, those unafraid of dust, time, or gods. Thank you for listening to the very last breath of this story, for walking with me from Howard Carter's torchlight to Tutankhamun's final sigh. But remember, do not let this journey end here. In the shadows of history, hundreds of secrets still wait to be awakened. Hit subscribe not for me, but for yourself, for those who refuse to live in a world confined to the present. Leave a comment. Do you believe in the curse or in mankind? The next video will make you question your own beliefs.